about the case yet.
Yeah, he's right over there. See the woman in the turquoise? He's
Yes.
right next to her.
Oh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming today. My name is Carrie Brown. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Commission on Women. We're an independent, nonpartisan state commission dedicated to advancing rights and responsibilities for women in Vermont. And I'd like to welcome you all here today on behalf of the commission and also our co-hosts for today's event, the League of Women Voters, which is an organization, a nonpartisan political organization encouraging full participation in government, as well as the Vermont Federation of Business and Professional Women, which works to promote participation, equity, and economic self-sufficiency for working women. To the candidates who are here today, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad that you've taken the time today to share your thoughts and your views and your plans on issues that concern women and girls in Vermont. We know that when women do well, all of Vermont does well. And we really appreciate your taking your time today to come and address these issues with us. Thanks also to our advisory council and to the many organizations and individuals who contributed questions for today's event. And thanks to Orca Media, who has a live video stream going online right now. And there are also people who are listening online on the VPR house stream. We have a little overflow space downstairs in room 11 if there are people who couldn't fit in here, and they can watch on video down there. I'd also like to thank the Sergeant at Arms office for all the help with the logistics of today. I have just a couple of requests for you before we get started. I'd like to ask you all to please hold your applause until the end of the entire event. That way we can spend as much time as possible listening to the candidates answer questions. And then if you're on Twitter, please feel free to tweet. We have a hashtag right up there, VTWomenAsk. We'd love to see you tweet that. So now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. It's my great pleasure to introduce Anne Galloway. Anne Galloway is the founder of VTdigger.org, a statewide news website that publishes watchdog reports on state government, politics, consumer affairs, business, and public policy. She's worked as a reporter and editor in Vermont for 20 years. She's the former editor of the Sunday Rutland Herald and Times-Argus, and she spent many years as a contributing writer for 7 Days and as a visual arts reviewer for the Times-Argus. Her reporting has appeared in, among other places, the New York Times, the New York Daily News, and Vermont Life. Thank you so much for being here, Anne, and I turn the reins over to you now.
Thank you so much, Carrie. Well, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to introduce the candidates now. We start on our right with Bill Spaceman Lee. He's from Craftsbury. He's a retired left-hand pitcher for the Boston Red Sox and the Montreal Expos, and he's a Liberty Union candidate. In the middle, we have Sue Minter. She's a Democrat from Waterbury. She's the former secretary of the Agency of Transportation, and she served for many years in the House of Representatives. And on the left, we have Republican Phil Scott. He's a lieutenant governor, and he's a former state senator, and he owns a company called Dubois Construction. Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to talk about the questions now. They've been submitted by the public, by experts, and by the organizations that have sponsored this event. Our timekeeper will have flashcards showing, well, first of all, each candidate has 2 minutes to respond to the questions. And for follow-up questions, they have 1 minute, and the timekeeper will let them know when they have 1 minute remaining, and then 30 seconds, and then a stop card. Candidates will address questions in alphabetical order, and we're going to start with Mr. Lee, then with Sue Minter, and then with Phil Scott. And finally, audience questions will be taken at 12:45. You'll have cards to fill out, and people will come around and collect the cards at the end of your aisle, so if you could just pass them down, that would be helpful. And then at 1 o'clock, we'll start the audience questions. And if we have time, there will be a 2-minute closing remark period for each of the candidates. So without further ado, let's get started. So this is the first question. We're starting again with Mr. Lee, and then followed by Sue Minter, and then Phil Scott. In Vermont, the median annual income for women who work full-time is $37,000 compared to $44,000 for men. This translates to a wage gap of $16,000. What will you do to eliminate this wage gap, Mr. Lee?
Bring it up to 44. 37 is a good number. I wore it my whole career. You know, I come from a group of strong women. My great-grandmother would have all of her ex-husbands over for Thanksgiving. This is back in the 1800s. You know, I'm a Burbank boy. I was a little north of Hollywood. But 6 generations before that, all my relatives came from Windham County. And I didn't know it. And I ended up settling in Vermont. So, you know, women's rights supersedes. There's an equity in here and a gender gap that was created a long time ago. And it's based on an economic system that's unfair. And you have to eliminate that. That's what it is. There's no such thing as trickle-down economy. Everything goes up. That's why the 2% have it all. Bernie was right. If The Big Short had won Picture of the Year instead of Spotlight, Bernie Sanders would be President of the United States. And I'm kind of fed up with all this foundational. 1 minute? Thank you. I don't own a watch. I don't own a cell phone. I don't use a computer, and I don't have a TV anymore. That died about a month ago. And I don't really see there's anything on it. I can get the Red Sox on radio. I can sit back. I am, I believe, the right guy for the job right now because of a few people before me. His name was R. Buckminster Fuller. The Meadows, Donnell and Dennis, the Rome Club. I was with them back in '69. I was one of the few people. I started Fair Share, Common Cause. I was also head of the bottle bill. You have recycling in Vermont because of me and Dukakis. Budweiser used to throw stuff at me. Pepsi Cola threw stuff at me. Guess what? I can field anything. I throw strikes, I keep the ball down, I don't alibi. And I will bring equal rights to women in this state. Our postmistress spends $400 a week on child care for 2 children. She brings in $400 a week. She makes nothing. We got to stop that.
Thank you. Sue?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being here. Bill, especially, thank you for being here. And Phil, you know, I'm glad I don't have to, again, debate an empty chair. It was an interesting experience, and I guess I've had a little bit of practice raising 2 teenagers, but I'm glad we're all here together. So I am really glad to be at a forum where we are talking about issues that are so important to women. But issues aren't just important to women. They're important to our families, and they're important to our economy. Because if we are going to make Vermont affordable to the middle class, we have to conquer the pay gap. You know, like a majority of Vermont women, I've lived this. I've worked hard, and probably harder than many of my male counterparts, and known that I was probably earning less. But, you know, for many women, this means that they cannot bring back adequate resources to meet their family's needs. Right now in Vermont, we know that 43% of women who work full-time still can't meet their basic needs. And at the current rate, the wage gap will not close for 30 years. We need to change this story. We need to do better. The gap exists for a number of reasons. Women are predominantly employed in low-wage jobs, like child care providers, elder care providers, and that's why we need to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. We also know that women are generally clustered in too few careers, and we're not tapping our greatest talent and assets. As Secretary of Transportation, I worked very hard to make sure more women came into the workforce. In fact, we doubled the number of women in our workforce, in our maintenance workforce, making sure we opened up careers, non-traditional careers for women. That's what I will continue to do as governor.
Thank you, Phil.
Well, I want to thank you as well for having all of us here today. There's going to be 9 more opportunities for you to hear us over the next 7 weeks. So there's stark differences between the candidates, and I'm happy to be here to get our views out. And I want to start out today by putting this right out on the table, because despite what you'll hear from my opponent's party and my opponents at large, I'm pro-choice. I support marriage equality. And I support equal pay for equal work. And that's because some of the most influential people in my life have been strong, independent women. My dad was a World War II vet. He passed away when I was 11, leaving my mom as he died of his war-connected injuries as a result of the D-Day invasion. He was a double amputee, spent 2 years in Walter Reed Hospital. He met my mom. My mom grew up on a farm in Plainfield, but she left her as a single mom with 3 rather rambunctious boys at that point. And I reflect on how difficult that must have been for her, how strong she had to be in order to protect us and take care of us. My aunt, Mary, from Lake Elmore, she was an inspiration to me as well. She took care of us a great deal. She was an RN, a nursing home administrator, one of the first select board women in Vermont. And she started the Memorial Area Cancer Network, one of the ones that started that program, and inspired me to start the Wheels for Warmth program. And I also have daughters. It's impossible to be a dad today and not see that there's still work to do. And I look forward to working with all of you to make sure our daughters have every opportunity, equal opportunity, as we move forward in the future. More specifically, in my first term in the Vermont Senate, I was proud to support Act 81, which required equal pay for equal work regardless of gender. This was furthered in 2007 with Act 41, which prohibited employers from discriminating based on gender identity. One challenge we should address is that women, more often than men, make difficult choices that result in less pay. In addition to equal pay protections, flexible work schedules, telecommunicating, and more affordable childcare, these initiatives could help reduce these barriers. But I'm sure that we'll have a lot of opportunity over the next hour or so to discuss these priorities.
Thank you. Next question. Some Vermonters have paid leave to help with family matters, such as the birth of a child or an ill loved one. Many do not. And the question is, would you support a state-administered insurance program that would provide paid family and medical leave to all Vermonters? If not, are there other means you would use to fund such a benefit? And the order this time is Sue, Phil, and then Bill.
Yes, I do support paid family leave, and Vermonters should not have to choose between their work, their child, or people they love and need. I know this, when I was pregnant with my first child, Ariel, I was in a new job. I was afraid to tell them about my pregnancy, and I had no security of whether I would have a job to get back for. Now, I fought hard, and in fact did have a job to come back to, but I know not a lot of women are not so lucky. When I had my second child, Jasper, I was a member of a union. I had paid leave and a secure job to go back to. Now, it shouldn't have to be luck to make sure that you have a job to go back to. We need to make sure that we work to guarantee that families can take leave, have a job to go back to so that they can actually go to work, earn a living, and have a clear job to go back to, whether or not it is a new child or the illness of a family member. And that is why I'm going to be working with Vermont businesses and employees to create a state-administered insurance program that everyone can have access to paid family leave. we always need to be thinking about how we can make it easier for Vermont families to live here. Now, my opponent, Phil Scott, does not support paid leave. He did not support paid sick leave. I want to make it easier for families to live here, to have time with their babies, to allow them to have time with their loved ones. As governor, I am going to work to make this happen.
I'm sorry, Phil, you're next.
Well, thank you, Sue, for answering part of my question, and I appreciate some of your answer. I look forward to seeing how you're anticipating to paying for all of that. And I'm very sympathetic to the challenges here, and I agree, no one should have to choose between caring for their family and making a living to provide for them. We also have to acknowledge that we have a shrinking workforce, and our economy needs every worker we can in order to grow, to expand that middle class and lift wages. We also have to acknowledge that in this past session, the legislature took great steps towards providing paid leave for employees, and I would not support any steps to reverse this. But businesses do need time to adjust and absorb these new costs. So I would not support an expansion of these mandates so soon. I think the idea of a new insurance option has merit as long as it's voluntary and helps make Vermont more affordable. I've said all along that my approach to every proposal will be very clear. If an idea makes Vermont more affordable for families and businesses, I'll support it. If it makes Vermont less affordable, I'm not going to support it. So I'm open to a discussion as long as we're focused on reducing the costs of living here in Vermont and doing business here as well. Because I know if we focus on making Vermont more affordable and growing the economy, there will be more opportunities to achieve the goals that we have in this area and many, many others. But we first have to live within our means. We're going to have to get control of this economy. We're going to have to focus on the economy in order for us to have a much more prosperous Vermont.
Thank you, Bill.
On the first question, I think we all agreed. On this question, it's 2-1, Sue and I against Phil. It all goes back to our economics. It's based on a false foundation. It's based on a guy named Thomas Malthus. The Malthusian quotient says that there's not enough to go around, that goods and services grow arithmetically and population grows exponentially. Well, I was head of zero population growth in Massachusetts. And when I had that third child, I was thrown out. But then I remarried and only had one kid. So I'm back to square one. So I believe I can answer this question, why we're going to have a way of finding out how to do it. My wife's Canadian. She wakes up in the morning and loves Vermont, but she can't listen to the radio. It drives her crazy. She goes, well, we do it this way. I go, well, they don't do it this way down here. Why don't they do it this way down here? Well, Thomas Malthus. Who's Thomas Malthus? So all of a sudden, if there's not enough to go around, and a guy named Adam Smith, who did Wealth of Nations, he comes out, and then a guy named Marx Engel, and I can't think of the third guy, but he comes out and says, well, if the workers are going to do everything, they should be the ones to benefit from it first. I think that's a great idea. I'm head of a union, too. I was head of the Players Association. I am responsible for more millionaires than anyone in this room. How did I do that? I took it away from billionaires. Money is like manure. It's only good when they spread it around. And in Vermont, we spread a lot of manure. So we got to take care of our environment first. If you take care of the environment first and clean up everything, your foundation, then you can start working on things like paid leave and everything else. It starts with the environment. If you don't fix that and don't clean up your rivers and don't clean up your water and don't clean up your air, none of the other stuff's going to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. This time the order is Phil, Bill, and Sue, and the question is, will you change or limit the way women and girls currently access reproductive health care, including abortion?
The simple answer is no. As I said earlier, despite what you'll hear from others, I'm pro-choice. I support marriage equality, and I support equal pay for equal work. That's because, again, some of the most influential people in my life have been strong, independent women, including my 2 daughters. I fully support a woman's right to choose and to have access to quality care. I may also be one of the only Republicans in the country to have spoken up against the calls to defund Planned Parenthood when that debate was going on in Washington not too long ago. And I think it's an important reminder that I'm always going to do what is right for Vermonters, and regardless of what my party might say. So the basic answer is no.
Thank you. Bill?
You see all these shootings happening and stuff down in Pensacola, and you see everything happening, and it's, we've got a problem in this country there's a lot of problems, but, you know, I support a woman's right to make a choice. I've always done that. I don't like abortion, but if it harms the mother or anything else, Phil, it goes back to Tunbridge Fair. I was driving down the road and I heard that poor Sue was sitting there by herself because Phil didn't show up because I wasn't allowed there. And you know what? I could have taken a right turn and got there. And I could have debated that too, but I'm not out here to take away Sue's votes. I'm out here after Phil's votes. I'm a gun toter. My mother's name is Hunt. All the Hunts live in southern Vermont. And what do? We hunt. So, yeah, I'm not afraid of killing things and, putting meat on the table. I eat roadkill. I'm about as conservative as they come. Sue, she didn't even go to the Northeast Kingdom. She didn't go to that debate. I was going to throw my cowboy hat in the ring up there in Irisburg, and there was no one to throw it at except all those other Democrats up there. And Galbraith, I like Galbraith. I read his father's book, Money, Where It Comes and Whence It Goes, and I'm an economics major at the University of Southern California. I was a minor, actually. But my professor, he called it economics. For the first year, I thought I was in an economics class because he was from India. That's globalization. So we live in a globalized network. We have to come together, and we got to give women's rights first. I may not believe in what you say, but I'll defend your right to say it with my life. That's the principle of democracy. I sound like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I kind of feel like it. It's the first time I've ever been in here. I like round things. I'm a geodesic dome guy. I want to live in a geodesic dome. I want to, save this planet. And I think being governor is a good start. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
So bringing the topic back to the issue of choice, I want to say that absolutely not. I will not restrict a woman's right to choose. This must remain a decision between a woman and her doctor without exception. Vermont is one of only a handful of states where women's health care is actually paramount. We have no restrictions at this time on access to abortion services. We have also expanded coverage for contraceptives. Listen to this, Bill. We even have passed a law requiring that vasectomies be added to the insurance policy.
I got one of them.
Okay. That's part of zero growth.
Yeah, but I had a reversal too, and I got a daughter out of it, so I'm ahead of the
Point
men.
is that men need to be a part of this conversation too.
I agree. No, I agree with everything you say.
But we've also expanded criminal penalties for threatening social workers or healthcare workers at Planned Parenthood clinics. And this is important because we are having harassment all around this country. And let's just face it, Republicans across this country right now are waging a war on women. Over 400 pieces of legislation have been introduced across this state last year alone to restrict women's right to abortion and health care. This cannot happen in Vermont. Now listen, I know Phil says he's pro-choice, but he has been recommended by the Vermont Right to Life Committee. He has supported restrictions that would reduce a woman's right to choose in the state of Vermont. We cannot let Vermont go backwards, and under my leadership, it will not.
Thank you. Next question. We're going to be starting with Bill Lee, then Sue, then Phil. And the question is, women are breadwinners in 1 out of 3 households, and working moms struggle to find affordable quality childcare. What are you hearing about the challenges Vermont's working mothers are facing, and what will you do to address them? We're starting with Bill.
1 out of 3 ain't bad. You go to the Hall of Fame if you hit 1 for 3. But in jobs and everything else, that's not good. I'd like to say something about Republicans. They're on the way out. They're dinosaurs. They're like Tyrannosaurus Rex. They got little short arms, and they can't get to their pockets. So they can't get to their pockets because that's where all the money is, because they already got it all wrapped up. Wealth is anti-entropic. It does not wear out. It does not wear out. They're living on their interest. And Bernie was right, but he didn't go far enough. And I'm going to go further than that. And women are going to be fine in my utopian environment. They're going to run the show because a lion sits on his ass and licks himself. It's the females that go out and hunt. So I'm basically, I just want to sit back. I'm I'm not an atheist. I believe in God. She's black, and her name is Lucy. And that's where it starts from. I'm a maternalist. I'm not a paternalist. I'm a conservative, but I believe I am so far left that I'm right. And I'll always be that way, and I'll always think that way. And I may be out of the box, but out of the box is good. When you're out of the box, you can see the ridges. You can see the trees, which are alive. You can see everything that's alive out there. Monotheism, everything is dead. It's a paternalistic guy named Abraham that started it all, and we got to do away with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue.
So I'm a working mom, I have 2 kids, and I truly understand the challenges that women and families face balancing work and childcare. And I know that it is especially critical for young parents to have access to affordable, quality early childhood care and learning. It allows them to get back to work, which is so critically important for women and families to make ends meet. And I'll tell you, I hear these challenges constantly on the trail. Women unable to find quality care, unable to afford that care, unable to make ends meet. And it is particularly women. And we have to look at the demographic changes happening. More and more, we have single-headed households and female-headed households. Right now, 30% of the female-headed households with children are living under the poverty line. So this issue of women and economic security is so critically important, as is access to early childhood care and after-school care. I am going to be focusing on this throughout my tenure. It is part of my economic development strategy to make sure we are getting more people access to livable wage jobs and economic security, and that includes women. Now, some people don't get how women's economic security and the economy are linked. Phil put out his economic development plan last week. I think it was 40 pages. And it did not mention the issues of women in work. I am a candidate who gets this, whose leadership is needed to make sure we are thinking across all the spectrums of need, that we're thinking about women and children. We're thinking about how critically important their needs and their economic security are for our economy. I am the leader with the experience to bring people together, to lead us forward, so that we can have more families who can afford to live in Vermont and stay here.
Thank you. Phil?
Well, first of all, thank you for bringing up the economic development plan that I put out last week. It is a 12-point plan. For those of you who are interested, you can look at it at philscott.org, see for yourself what it includes, what it doesn't. I think it's a great blueprint, something to start with, because we need to focus on economic development in this state, something that we haven't done for the last number of years, and it's something that is really needing our priority. Access to reliable, high-quality, affordable childcare is a very real challenge for many throughout Vermont, many families throughout our state. Many of the young moms I speak with talk about the lack of options and how nearly half of their monthly income goes to childcare. And I want to be very clear about something else you might have heard, regardless of what you see on TV from my opponent's surrogates. I believe in the science. I believe early education is essential, and we should do more to expand our efforts. But having said that, I don't see the need to increase taxes to do so. I know we can do this by restructuring. We can reform our education system as a whole in order to find savings through there. The legislature's own consultants have indicated in this PICUS report. They asked for this report to see what savings we could find. They found more than $150 million of efficiency savings in the PICUS report alone. And if we just imagine if we had $150 million more, we could dedicate $25 million to early education. We could take another $25 million and put it towards STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And then we could take the rest of it, the $100 million left over, and we could return that to some taxpayers that are in desperate need. They're overburdened as it is. And I think this would be an enormous step in the right direction in both strengthening education and reducing our property tax burden. One of the major expenses for child care centers is the building itself and maintenance as well. And if communities could partner with child care providers to provide space for those child care folks, we could make this more affordable. And I'm thinking, those empty rooms in the schools, the empty rooms in the libraries, the empty rooms in the community rooms could be utilized as for the infrastructure for child care centers as well. We just have to think outside the box, look for areas of opportunity.
Thank you.
Ran a red light.
I do that every now and then.
I know. Do
All
away
right.
with it.
Well, the next question is about human trafficking. Traffickers exploit economic vulnerability and addiction using violence, threats, deception, debt bondage, and other manipulative tactics to force people to engage in commercial sex or provide labor or services against their will. What will you do as governor to assist victims and hold perpetrators responsible in human trafficking cases? And we're going to start here with Sue.
Well, human trafficking is a despicable, predatory, criminal activity that traps vulnerable people into bondage. It's like modern-day slavery, and it exists here in Vermont. We do have in Vermont some of the toughest laws on the books with respect to human trafficking. I appreciate the work done by the legislature. Victim services and protections are crucial if we want to make it safe for women and children and other vulnerable populations to step out of the shadows. And this is also needed for victims of domestic violence, which is a silent epidemic happening throughout this state that I have become more and more conscious and exposed to. Protecting those victims to enable them to have security when they tell their stories. Now, there are many in this room who are working hard to be their advocate, and I want to be their advocate too. It's one of the reasons I am supporting gun safety. Now, let me tell you, Bill, because I know that you are concerned about this as well as I am. We do have a challenge in Vermont, and it is often behind closed doors. Right now, the majority of homicides in Vermont are domestic violence related. and most of them are with a gun. And in states where we have background checks on all handguns, 46% fewer women are shot to death by their intimate partner. So I do want to stand up for common sense gun safety, background checks for all gun sales. I support the Second Amendment. I support hunters' rights. I don't want to take guns away from law-abiding citizens, but I do want to keep people safe behind those closed doors. And I hope you'll stand with me.
Thank you, Phil.
Well, I agree. Human trafficking is a despicable act, and it's something that I will not tolerate, nor should any of us tolerate. The top priority of government is public safety. When I was in the Vermont State Senate, I co-sponsored the Safe Communities Act, which increased the scope of stalking laws. I also supported Act 58 of 2009, which added sex trafficking to the Internet Sex Offender Registry, and Act 85 of 2010, which established a human trafficking task force. So, in part, to identify those resources for victims, and I think that's important that we keep that moving forward. And so, as governor, I will continue to look for ways to hold perpetrators accountable and to assist victims of human trafficking and other egregious acts against women in particular.
Thank you, Bill.
Well, I work in prisons, and traffickers don't do well in prison. So I'm the longest continuous person in a prison called San Quentin. Started playing ball there in 1960, and I've been back. And I talk to prisoners and stuff. Most of the people I know that commit crimes are not crimes of passion. Well, there are a few of those too, and there are a lot of guns involved in that too. But it all boils back to economics. You take away the economic problem, people are happy to go to work, they're not into trafficking. You got to start with the foundation. What we're doing is attacking symptoms of the problem. You attack symptoms, you're not going to get anywhere. You got to attack problems, not symptoms. And what we're discussing right now are symptoms of problems. Guns don't kill people. Bullets kill people. As Chris Rock said, if you made a bullet $7,500, there'd be a lot less killing going on. So, clip registration. I shoot ducks. I have a Browning Auto 5. I have a Browning 410. I have a 28 gauge. I have an Ithaca 16 gauge. Yeah, I got too many guns. But you need a different caliber for everything you're going to shoot. And I think that's what it is. You eliminate the clips in guns. The handgun things, I don't believe in handguns. I have a 36 caliber Colt conversion Jesse James gun. I couldn't hit Jack Diddley with that thing, you know, but it will kill close range. You just, if you're afraid, go out and get 2 gray geese. Put them on your front steps, and I guarantee you no one's going to come up to your front door without you knowing about it. You don't need guns. We need more geese. Thank you.
Okay, this is the last call for audience questions, so people will be coming around to collect them, and we'll be reading audience questions at 1 o'clock, so thanks very much. The next question has to do with workplace accommodations for pregnant workers, and we're going to start with Phil, we're going to move on to Bill, and then with Sue. Would you support a state law requiring reasonable workplace accommodations for pregnant workers, such as access to water, seating, and more frequent restroom breaks?
Yeah, absolutely. In 2007, as a matter of fact, I supported Act 144, which required employers to extend accommodations to nursing moms in the workplace. And I think we can extend other protections as well to pregnant workers. I understand that some occupations might not be perfectly suited for these situations, but I believe we can work with businesses in order to meet these needs in their workplace as well for their workforce. We're struggling here in Vermont with the size of our workforce. There's less people working today than there were 7 years ago. And that's a problem. That's part of the issue that I see facing us today, the economic challenges we face. because we have less people working, particularly in our youth. So we need to be as flexible as possible in order to attract and retain all workers, and I will continue to seek ways of doing that. And again, my priority is the economy. And if we can focus on the economy, all pull in the same direction, then we can have a much more prosperous Vermont, and we can put more people to work, and we could be attractive to many to come to our state and live here and enjoy what we enjoy as Vermonters.
Thank you. Bill?
Yes, I believe in all of those. It's you know, it's a no-brainer. I mean, people need more breaks. I've had a lot of pregnant wives. I've got all my kids. They've all graduated. They've all done well. Well, I got my youngest is in graduate school down in Georgia. I just don't understand why they all go south. But you know, believe in the workplace. I've always been that way. I'm a Renaissance guy in that respect. I believe in every woman's right that's out there, and I've never worked against it. My aunt is in the Hall of Fame. My aunt was the greatest left-handed pitcher in the history of the League of Their Own. Annabelle Lee's got a poem written to her, and Hazel broke her leg, her mother, at the age of 47, sliding into second base. You know, Imogene, my other grandmother, she was a walker. She married Paul Adams Hunt. She was a flower arranger. My new nickname is Imogene, because I'm a flower arranger. I arrange flowers. I do that, and I think it's a credit to, you know, doing the right thing at the right time. I'm a pragmatic guy, and the thing about me is I'm neither a Democrat nor a Republican. I believe they're both obsolete terms, and that's the problem. We got to do away with two things in this planet: cortisol and Citizens United. With cortisol, if you have no cortisol, you're a Zen Buddhist, you're a samurai warrior, you're an Aikido master. Cortisol is fear. We got to do away with fear. You do away with fear, you get rid of Citizens United, this planet will be a lot better place. I'm even beyond that. I believe in rubbing out borders. I want to rub out the border between Quebec and here, because I can get an x-ray in Quebec for $18. How much does it cost down here? I got hit with a line drive last winter, knocked out one of my teeth, and then about 4 months later, the other two started dying. So I got 3 implants, Dr. Dosty, up in Quebec, with the crowns and everything, for 7,000 Canadian. How much does it cost down here?
Thanks, Bill. Sorry, time's up.
That's it.
All right, now we're going to move on to trades and technical programs.
I didn't answer.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sue. I apologize. Please go right ahead.
Okay, well, I absolutely also support listen, I know what it feels like to be working pregnant. I know how it needs to be not just near a bathroom and have access to water, but lactation facilities. When I had my first job in the state where we were supposed to have lactation facilities, I had to sneak away to work in the office, in the corner of the office. Actually, Tina, who works down in the Sergeant of Arms office, was the nice lawyer who allowed me to go into her space to pump. So when I got to be Secretary of Transportation, I was so glad to have the opportunity to make sure that all of our young women employees had access to lactation facilities. And I want to make sure that all young women have access to lactation facilities throughout state government. We've got a great Mamava, a great company here in Vermont who's making that possible around the world. This is what we need to do to keep young people into the workforce. We want to keep young people in Vermont. We want Vermont State to be the employer of choice. We need to make accommodations. But we need to be thinking about our next generation in so many ways, and it's why I want to support not just early childhood education, but education after high school. Because we are doing a great job in Vermont getting kids through high school, the highest high school graduation rates in the country. But when it comes beyond high school, we are actually at the bottom of the country. So while 2/3 of the jobs of the 21st century require education and training beyond high school, we're not giving it to them. And that's why I'm proposing 2 years tuition-free at Vermont Technical College or the Community College of Vermont. And I am going to require everyone give public service and have a volunteer mentor. We're going to make sure that every community college campus has childcare available so that adult learners can go back to school. We need people to get qualified for livable wage jobs. Businesses cannot grow today because they can't find qualified workers. We need to connect the dots to make our economy grow and make sure we have economic prosperity for the next generation.
Thank you. Now we're going to talk about trades and technical programs, so good segue there. We're going to start with Bill Lee, and then Sue, and then Phil. Young women make up about 5% of students completing trades and technical programs at Vermont high schools. Future labor demands for skilled workers in these higher-paying occupations will be unmet if we continue to fail to recruit and retain young women. What is your plan to attract and retain more of them in these programs? Starting with you, Bill.
You got to have jobs first. You got to have something that you're going to go to, and you got to train towards that job. You can't just have education first and then come down and have no jobs. People are leaving the state. Phil mentioned that. I saw the Republican debates. That was one of the good points he made, that people are leaving this state. We got to keep them in this state. And I believe that the future is good here because global warming is forcing more people to look for water, and Vermont's got all the water. You know, I picked my house on the ridge where I did on the Reed farm because there was a spring there. You always have your spring above your house, then you have your house, and then you have your leach field. You don't do it in the opposite direction. Something you learn really early here in the building side of it. So, you know, it's education. I believe that I work with a lot of educators down in the state of Connecticut, and they're having a big thing right now, you know, about they're going to the Supreme Court. And the thing is, you have to have the jobs at the far end. So we're going to create jobs that we will educate towards, and I think everything will go a lot better. I think we've done it backwards. We have Khan Academy. We have tons of available stuff out there that we can educate a lot differently, a lot cheaper, and it's going to trickle down. Yeah, can't use the word trickle down. That's a Reagan thing. Ronald Reagan was a swim instructor from Illinois that was born in Valley of Poor Potatoes, Ireland, and everybody thinks he was the great, you know, orator and everything else. He was an actor. He was Bonzo Goes to Hollywood, you know. I couldn't stand him. I used to quail hunt up on his ridge in Verdugo in California, and finally he put his estate up there, and I couldn't shoot mountain quail anymore, and I really didn't like him after that. But back to jobs and back to education. You got to do it first. You got to have the jobs at the end of the line, places you can go, and then educate towards it. That's what I believe.
Thank you, Sue.
Yes, we have to have the jobs, and we have to have the education, and we have to get more women out of the lowest paying wage jobs. 50% of the women who work full-time are employed in the fields where the median annual salary is $35,000. That is the crux of this wage gap. I'm going to tell you, it does take education, it does take training, but it takes recruitment and retention. When I came to be Secretary of Transportation, the federal government was threatening to take our federal dollars away because the Republican administration that preceded us, or at least during their tenure, many fewer women and people of color were employed at the agency that we had to establish, and I did this, establish a task force on affirmative action. So it took intention on recruiting, mentoring. We had wonderful women in our workforce that went out to schools and tech centers to actually recruit and be role models. I'm so proud of the two women who won 2 years ago, Engineer of the Year and Young Engineer of the Year. They just both happened to be women working at the Agency of Transportation. But they saw it as their mission to bring more women in, because we need to make sure that women have role models. You've got to see it to be it. So yes, my tuition-free education at CCV and VTC is going to help women get access to the education and training they need. We're also going to match every student with a volunteer mentor to be that champion, to help them see what's possible. Because right now, 4 out of 10 kids are graduating high school in Vermont, and they're not going beyond, and they can't make ends meet. We have a lost generation, and if we don't bring them forward and give them hope and aspiration and an opportunity for a career and economic security, our future will be bleak. So yes, we're going to bring women into the workforce at higher wage jobs. We're going to recruit them. We're going to be role models for them. We're going to make it happen in our state. We have to.
Thank you. Phil?
Well, the reality is 33.6% of those working in Vermont in STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, are women. And that's compared to about 28% nationwide. And I think that's something to be very proud of, and Vermont is ahead of the curve in this area. But we have a lot of work to do to further that. You may not know this about me, but I went to UVM to be a tech ed teacher. I really love to create things, build things, problem solve, and I thought I wanted to be a teacher. I did my student teaching at U32 and decided at that point, maybe not for me. I'm going to go into business at that point. But that's one reason I've always supported good educational programs and opportunities for young women, such as Rosie's Girls. And I think it's important to give young women that hands-on access in these fields. And that's one way we'll get the results we're looking for. Last week, as Sue had mentioned before, I released a comprehensive blueprint for economic growth, which includes my ideas for investing in our workforce. In the last 6 years alone, as I mentioned before, the state of Vermont has lost nearly 16,000 workers from its workforce. And I propose we're partnering with our state colleges and universities, regional development corporations and others, so that we retain at least 50% of the 10,000 students that graduate every single year from our colleges and universities. It's fertile ground there. We just have to provide opportunities for them to stay. It has to be affordable. They have to have opportunities. They have to have affordable housing. So we have to focus on the economy in order for us to be better. It's also important to acknowledge that because of the unsustainable property tax rates, many schools can't offer tech ed programs anymore. And if we're going to have more young women access these skills, we have to recognize that having those programs in the schools is going to be essential so that we can have that creative mind working so that they can experiment in those areas. So as governor, I'll bring tech ed back into the schools so that we can have a more creative economy.
Thank you very much. All right, this question has to do with legal representation, and we're going to start with Sue and then move to Phil and then with Bill. Too many Vermonters involved in divorce, custody, and relief from abuse proceedings cannot afford an attorney and proceed without representation. Without legal representation, they lack the expertise to best present their case, and many enter into legally binding agreements regarding their safety, their children, and their finances that do not protect their interests. What steps would you take as governor to ensure that Vermonters have access to legal services when they can't afford to hire a lawyer? Starting with you, Sue.
Well, I think access to justice should and must be available to all Vermonters, particularly those facing challenges of domestic abuse and where they cannot afford their own lawyer. Of course, that's the work of our legal aid. But we aren't doing enough, and we should be thinking about how more low-income Vermonters, especially domestic violence, those who are at financial disadvantage, can actually access a lawyer. One of the things that I would like to do as governor is actually establish a commission in order to really convene, I guess, the VAR Association to investigate what it takes to expand access to justice and how we can pay for it. This isn't a simple question. It's going to take real strategies. I will tell you that we have to have a leader who actually faces his challenges head on. That's the kind of leader I am. I'm someone who sets goals and achieves goals. This is one of many areas of access to justice and criminal justice reform that we need to be thinking about if we are going to actually move into the 21st century and make sure, among many things, that we are not allowing recidivism to make more people incarcerated. I say less incarceration, more education. We are spending $82,000 a year putting people behind bars. It would cost $35,000 a year to put them into a seat, an empty seat right now at our state college. That's the way we need to be thinking differently about criminal justice reform, making sure we have greater access to justice and greater representation, especially for victims of domestic violence. Thank you.
Thank you. Phil?
Well, if there are Vermonters being forced to navigate our legal system without counsel, it seems to me that the judiciary, Vermont's lawyers, should help us understand how we can make sure this is never the case. As governor, I'll partner with all of you, the judiciary, the Defender General, and all stakeholders to ensure that representation is given to the Vermonters who are able to or are unable to afford it. It's something that we have to, it's a basic premise of our Constitution, basic premise of who we are. Vermont Legal Aid and Vermont Law Help are two existing resources that provide legal services to Vermonters struggling to find legal representation they can't afford. And this is another reminder of why we need to really focus on the economy and make affordability one of the prime issues of this campaign. We need to make sure our economy and wages are growing and that the costs of living aren't exceeding our ability to pay. We need to make sure that the budgets aren't growing faster than our wages. And that's what's happening here in Vermont. And if we can do that, we can reduce the size of this challenge and many others, but it's going to take all of us pulling in the same direction, focusing on the economy to make the affordability, this crisis of affordability that we're facing here in Vermont, something that can be solved. But we're all going to have to recognize that this is the biggest issue that's facing us as Vermonters.
Thank you. Bill?
You're right. You need more pro bono lawyers out there helping the people that don't have access to it. I'm dealing with it right now in my neighborhood. People come to me, they're advocates, they're getting run out of their houses and they have no voice. I have no voice, but I must speak. It's a Richard Ellison novel about a guy whose mouth was sewn shut and it just builds up pressure inside you and it drives you nuts. And I have access to lawyers. I play with Downs, Racklin, and Martin. I play basketball on Wednesdays in St. Johnsbury. Miro Weinberger's my catcher. You know, I have my outlets. I go out there. Laws are like spider webs. They entrap the weak and are broken by the strong. So you have to have the weakest get the most protection. And, you know, you've got to get the person. It usually involves land. It usually involves someone wanting someone else's stuff. And as Thomas Naylor wrote in Affluenza, we have too much stuff. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to ban mini storage. Then you don't have so much stuff. You don't need that stuff. We got too much stuff. And then I'm going to add a 20% ban on our Bud Light. Every Skidoo trail around here, there's nothing but Bud Light cans on it. You go in the spring, you can make a fortune just walking the Skidoo in the Northeast Kingdom and taking Bud Light cans. If Bud Light wants to stay in the state, they got to increase their revenue to 20% on the can, you know? And McDonald's trash, it's all over the place. The problem was we don't eat right. We don't eat right on this planet, and I think Vermont is going to be the bastion of eating right. The Northeast Kingdom is. We have the best cheese, we got the best beer, we got Pete's Greens, we all eat within 5 miles of our house. When you do that, all these other problems will evaporate. What we're discussing is symptoms of the problem. You gotta attack the big problems, and all these other things will dry up, like California. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not quite sure what food has to do with legal representation, but let's move on. So how would you address racism and racial bias in policing and other public systems? And we're going to start with Phil, move on to Bill, and then Sue.
Well, we don't have to go very far just to turn on the TV or turn on the radio to see what an incredible, difficult, frustrating issue this is across our country, and we're facing it right now. I think that we have to, first of all, respect each other. I've made it my mission in life, whether it's on the racetrack or in business or in political life, to treat others the way I expect to be treated. And I think across state government, across law enforcement, we need to make sure that our law enforcement are trained appropriately, to make sure that there's no bias in any sense of the word, that we shouldn't tolerate it. And I would be an advocate for doing so. Again, treating each other with respect that we all deserve, that we all expect, and that we deliver as well. So it comes from the top, it's leadership, and we just have to make sure that it trickles down and make sure that our law enforcement and others have the proper training in order to make sure that there is no racial bias, no implications of that sort whatsoever. It won't be tolerated.
Thanks, Bill.
You know, I stuck up for Bernie Carbo in Boston, and I got deported to Canada. And then I stuck up for Rodney Scott, who was being abused up in the Montreal area, and I got kicked out of Montreal. You know, and but I do racial profile. If I'm in the kingdom and I see a black guy in a vehicle, I find out when he stops, I go up and the first thing I ask him is, are you over 35? And then I ask, what position do you play? Because I still play baseball. In other words, I ask questions. I go out there. And that's what's wrong in our society. We have gotten so afraid and so fearful that we've created gated communities. We got a police force that's out there that's trigger happy, not so much up here. But you look at Burlington and look at that, black people get pulled over more than white people. You know, and it's just in the nature, and we created this problem a long time ago. And if you do the economic things, I think we've got to quit seeing in black and white. I'm looking, can you throw strikes? Can you hit the ball? You know, what position do you play? You know, that's the way I look at life, and that's the way I look at law enforcement. It's a tough job. You know, everybody out there is turning into Barney Fife, you know, and they're scared and they're fumbling with their guns and they're shooting people at the wrong time. This is terrible, and this is what's going to happen. This was predicted. This was predicted by the Meadows in 1969 in Limits to Growth. They showed the graph. They showed what was going to happen when water gets more restrictive and fuel prices go up. They showed what was going to happen, and we're a civilization that is on the brink of becoming extinct.
Thank you. Sue?
Well, I really thank you for the question, because racial bias, and I will add gender bias, requires us all to truly look at ourselves, because we all carry our own biases based on our life experience. And there is tremendous racial tension and violence going around in this country that we're all aware of. But we cannot think for a minute that we are immune from that in Vermont. I know family members who have been pulled over because of the color of their skin, not because of their driving habits. I know that we have a challenge in Vermont. Look at what's happening in Rutland. I want to be a governor that will always keep my borders open to refugees fleeing war and persecution. And we have tremendous fear of those with different cultural backgrounds. The only way we're going to address these fears is by welcoming diversity, bringing greater diversity to our state. That's why it was so important that we doubled the number of women in our maintenance workforce and tripled the people of color. I don't usually talk about that because it went from 2 to 6. But we have to continue to focus on diversity. I am going to have a cabinet that has diversity at its center. I am going to work on hiring practices. We are going to welcome more people from outside our borders into our homes. I housed a refugee family 6 years ago. We never had a word that we understood between us. This was a family fleeing persecution from Russia, a Muslim family. It did create some stir in our community, but you know what? We didn't have a language. We learned to communicate together through making food, through making music, through dance. Our whole community has benefited from this diversity and this family who are now active parts of our local economy.
Time.
Thank you.
So this is the last question, and we're going to start with Bill, and then move on to Sue, and then Phil.
I love last question. I mean, like, recess?
No, then we have closing remarks, so. Vermont's sole prison for women has aging infrastructure, lacks programming space, houses majority nonviolent offenders, and costs $80,000 a year to house an inmate. What are your plans to address the disproportionate costs to house low-risk offenders, as well as the lack of parity in programming between men and women in the state? And again, we're starting with Bill.
Me?
That would be you.
Oh, I thought Bill.
Sorry.
I do have a problem with hearing.
Oh, sorry.
As Eugene Debs said, if there's a lesser class, I am of it. If there's a person incarcerated, I am not free. And we're throwing people in prison because of economic problems and stuff, so we got to let them out. I believe in building trails. I believe in getting people working out. I believe in the opioid addiction in our state is brought on by the designated hitter.
I knew you were going to bring that one up.
Because its specialization breeds extinction. In Red China in 1976, I was there. I was at the funeral of Zhou Enlai. And I went to all the elementary schools. And I watched the little bundled up people. It was like 10 degrees above zero. It was cold. They ran them for 45 minutes. They ran all their children. You wonder why they have all the jobs and why all our manufacturing's in China? Because they're in shape. And that's where your opioid comes from, your addiction. We're fat, we're out of shape, we're lazy, we're round, and we do not exercise enough. If you stop and get that problem out, you secrete your own endorphins, which are stronger than the opioids, and you don't have to go out and find anything. This is the problem. These women that are in jail are in there from abuse and economic disasters and bad relationships and everything else. It's not their fault. They're a victim. They're all victims. I'm a Eugene Debs guy. Peter Diamondstone anointed me. He came to me and said, "You have to run." I said, "I don't want to run." He says, "You have to run. You go home. You read Plato's Republic again," which I had read, and I read that little part in there on the art of governing. And in there in the art of governing it said, as young Plato was sitting on Socrates' lap, he said, the worst thing you can do is when asked is to not run. So Peter told me to, and that's why I'm here, and all these other problems will melt away when you get rid of Democrats and Republicans left and right and all this subterfuge we have. I am neither. I'm the guy that'll lead you out of the wilderness. Thank you.
Time. Thanks. Sue?
Well, I agree with Bill that it all comes down to the economy. And that's why I want to grow jobs and economic opportunity for Vermonters, help make sure we have vibrant communities to keep young people here, and to give people more hope. I agree that the women's prison and low-risk offenders need alternative models. We have to be thinking differently. When we are a country that has the highest rate of incarceration in the world, and we are spending more and more dollars and not getting results. It is about giving people economic opportunity. But for those people who are in custody, we have to be able to think of alternatives, especially for women and their children to be together. We need those kinds of ideas to move us not just to helping reduce recidivism, but to lower costs so we can spend more on educating people. I want to just speak because Bill brought it up, and it's true, more and more people affected by opiates. I want to address the opiate epidemic head on. When I was the Irene Recovery Officer after the worst natural disaster in nearly a century, I was a special appointee in the governor's office. I intend, when I'm governor, to have an opiate crisis manager who, like I was able to do after Irene, is thinking 24/7 about this crisis because it is affecting every community of this state, every aspect of our state. And if we don't have a strategy working forward together, we need to bring together the folks from the enforcement community, from the treatment and prevention. We have to look at prescribing habits. We have to call upon the pharmaceutical industry to come to bat to find out how we can look at pain management that doesn't make people addicts for life. We need to think very differently and strategically, and I will have a task force pulling together all of those different pieces, setting markers and goals of where we are now and where we need to get. That's how we recovered successfully after Irene. We had an interagency team, we set goals, and we achieved those goals. We have to be doing that. This crisis of opiate epidemic is actually more intense and devastating than Irene was.
Thank you. Phil?
Well, this may surprise some of you, but I don't agree with everything Governor Shumlin has said or done over the last few years. But I do remember being in this chamber, and it was one of the State of the State addresses, and I remember him saying, it was a profound statement, I thought at the time, and he said, you know, we have to figure out who we're afraid of and who we're mad at and differentiate between the two. And I thought that that was so profound when you think about that. It's such a simple statement, but it's so true. And it's something that we have to address in this state. We have a high incarceration rate. We have a crisis of affordability on our hands, and part of it is the high cost of incarceration in itself. And it appears, I put out a 10-point opiate plan about a month ago, and many of the things, I think Sue must have read it because many of the things that she talked about are in that plan. And one of the issues, it is about looking at Rutland, for instance. They've done a great job with Project Vision there, and I'm saying that we should bring that out. We should all get together and talk about the different approaches to this crisis that we're facing as well with addiction issues. And as well, Gloucester, Massachusetts, for instance, has been utilizing a concept where they're giving flexibility to their law enforcement so that they aren't in violation. If they're caught in violation of an addiction issue, they will be they're given some latitude to put them in treatment. And I think that that's really, really important, that they see it on the ground. They have boots on the ground. They understand it. They see it and feel it. So they're given that latitude to put them in treatment instead of putting them in prison. And so we have many, many debates in the future, but the incarceration rates in the state are a problem, the high costs as well. And that's why, we have to look at some of the out-of-state incarceration as well as in-state, and how do we afford to continue to move forward in this state while facing this crisis of affordability that we have.
Thank you. Okay, now we're on to the final 2-minute remarks, and we're going to start with Sue Minter, followed by Phil Scott, and last up will be Bill Lee. So thank you very much, Sue, if you want to start.
I'm usually a starter. I only close bars.
Well, thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Ann, for moderating. I am so glad we had this chance to talk about issues that are so important to women. I'm not running because I am a woman. I'm running because I'm the most qualified to be the next governor of this state. But I think today we laid out some issues about why diversity in leadership matters. Women today are making 84 cents to every dollar earned by men. 43% of women in Vermont who work full-time still can't make ends meet. Economic security for women matters, for families and for our state. And we need a leader Who is going to understand these problems? Who's going to know what it's like to be pregnant and going to work? Who's going to know the struggles and the need for quality, affordable childcare? Who's going to be thinking about our next generation and the need for post-secondary education and what's going to happen to the next generation? The importance of paid family leave and of raising the minimum wage. The importance of having livable wage jobs and the opportunity for training and education for women and men so that we can grow the economy, so that we can have the workforce for our businesses to grow. I'm asking for your vote for governor so that we can ensure that we do have early childhood education and tuition-free college for technical and community college, to make our communities stronger by investing in our downtowns and villages, supporting entrepreneurs, creating livable wage jobs, and to make sure that we protect our environment, fighting for clean water, clean energy, and a green energy economy. You know, whether it was working with thousands of Vermonters to rebuild roads, homes, businesses, and communities after Irene, or whether it's been making our bridges and roads safer as your transportation secretary, I've had the extraordinary privilege of helping to bring people together to move Vermont forward. And that's what I want to do as your governor. In 225 years of history, we've only had one woman governor.
Time.
It's time.
Thank you. Let's hold our applause to the end, please. Phil Scott.
Well, again, thank you very much for having us all here today. I'm running for governor to make the economy the most important issue that we face. I think making Vermont more affordable and restoring faith and trust in government is something that has been missing for a number of years. We see it across the nation, and people just don't have any faith and trust left. And we need to act appropriately in order to restore that in some way. I think this election is all about the economy. Vermont expects and deserves a renewed focus on making Vermont more affordable, growing the economy, and keeping jobs here in the state. And this is something I've been talking about for the last 5 years, and the lack of focus and action in this area is why I've decided to step up to run myself. From taxes and fees to household bills, increasing costs are undermining the economic vitality of this state for families, making a real burden for families and businesses in our state's economy as a whole. As I talk with working Vermonters every single day, they're struggling to make ends meet. I did my Vermont Everyday Jobs where I work a day in someone else's shoes. And they're working 2 and 3 jobs just to get by, and they're not getting there. They can't pay their property taxes. They need to make their rent payments, their mortgage payments, and they're just not getting by. And we can do better. And I believe if we're clear about our goals and what we want to achieve, I know we can make Vermont the best state in the nation to start a small business and to raise a family. And that will be my goal as governor. Focus on the economy, make this more affordable so everyday Vermonters, families can come here and really benefit from what we all know exists here in Vermont. It's a special place, and I think it can be even better if we play our cards right. And I thank you again for having us here today.
Thank you. Let's hold our applause to the end, please.
The closer.
Bill, you're the closer.
Thank you. You only get one first impression in life. You only meet someone for the first time. I'm different. I'm different than both the other candidates because I did not create the problems that you're in right now. I believe Vermont is perfect. Vermont is not a state, it's a state of mind. I came here a long time ago because I was asked to by John Savage, the Red Sox Foundation, by the Sox Exchange, WDEV brought me in, Don Martin from WCAX. They put me up in Middlesex Notch in a small cabin, and it snowed on October 8th. And the rock in there had a little spring through it, and it froze up on us. and I ended up in the Demick's cabin over in Greensboro Bend. And if it wasn't for Lonesome Dove coming out that year, I'd have froze to death. You know, and I said, and I learned to cross-country ski. I learned to snowshoe. I got back in shape. I got back on the horse, licked my wounds, and stayed here and stayed out of people's business. But I believe I have a mouth and I must speak out, and we've got to change things, and I think you need a new direction. And I believe you will need me. You know, I've buried 4 of my ball players. I buried Floyd Brown, who started the senior league. I buried Ralph Bingham, my catcher, Bob Elliott, who had a tryout with the Red Sox, and Rolly Denton, who had a heart attack after striking out 9 guys and hitting a home run up in North Troy. You know, I'm a kingdom guy. I'm a conservative. I dig my own potatoes by hand. I weed my garden by hand. I built my house with my own hands. You know, I built that house, and I'm proud of it. I'm proud to be in Vermont, and I hope to stay, and I'll do the right job for you, I guarantee it, because I'm the only guy with his hands in his own pockets. I've only taken $20 for this job, and that was from a guy from Wisconsin, and I said, I don't want your money. I don't believe in Wisconsin. I believe they set the price of cheese, and that's why we have to dump milk. I don't like Wisconsin. He says, don't worry. He said, I've already sold the signed check for $40 to another guy from Wisconsin Rapids. I said, amazing. That's when I pitched in Wisconsin Rapids, and I got brought up to the big leagues with the Red Sox.
Time. Thank you. Okay, a big hand of applause for the candidates, and thank you, audience. This is a great event. Thank you for coming, and I hope you go out to vote on November 8th.
Hey, yeah, Robert Mitchell, Thunder Road. Thank you, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you. I think I would have done a little better if I'd had some.
Yeah, that's true. Amazing. Yeah. That's good. I have a question for you. My name's Sarah Flynn. On the topic of recidivism, would you give me businesses? Yeah, that is get out, they don't have another job. And